Bill.
Hey, TJ.
Hey, Bill. So, for anyone who's tuning into this podcast, this YouTube, this is our first episode, by the way. So, give it some grace. Um, Anyone tuning in, and this might be a home health practitioner, this might be a DME provider, this might be a nurse practitioner or GP, anyone who kind of works with seniors. You might be a family member who has a senior that they're looking after and kind of trying to take in this information. What would you say would be like a really solid reason for them to sit and listen to us here jabber for the next 10, 15 minutes?
I think I've talked to so many people who tell me that they wish they had met me a year ago. And so, I can almost point to those people because they had a loved one or a friend or somebody who suffered with a wound that they were not able to heal. And so I think somebody that's looking for some hope that this wound that someone is dealing with, that there is some possibility that you could advance the healing of it. I think that's why you should listen.
Love that. And we're just jumping right into it here. You can see my rebirth logo, your rebirth logo, and you mentioned wounds, chronic wounds. Talk to me a little bit more about that. And for those who are kind of just jumping into this discussion, what is this whole rebirth thing? What does it have to do with wounds? Like, give us the lowdown on that.
Well, maybe the first thing we should do would be define a chronic wound,
That's a good
right?
point.
I think that in our world, a chronic wound is at least stage two. So, and if you're not from the wound world, which I think most people aren't, then wounds are staged depending on what they are physically manifesting. So, stage two is when a wound is first open, and then the stage numbers increase depending on the severity of the wound, the depth of the wound, and other kind of statistics or factors. So, it needs to be at least a stage two wound. It needs to not be infected
Hmm.
um, for us to be able to treat it. It can still be a chronic wound if it's infected, but it would need to be cultured and then treated, and then we could treat. So it needs to be those things. And again, in our world, it needs to be at least 28 days old before we can come in and treat the wound.
Yeah,
So
making
those
sense in
are
terms of chronic wound. You'd think there's some length of time, and
right.
obviously we're talking about seniors here, but who are the folks that are typically suffering from this or would benefit most from maybe talking to us or one of our providers?
I can tell you anybody that spends a lot of time in a stationary position, probably.
Mm,
But for me, primarily so far, it has been paraplegics and quadriplegics, people who are bedbound, but other people maybe who spend an inordinate amount of time in their life in a recliner. Maybe they sleep in their recliner and they're just not moving. They're not taking pressure off of the points in their body that will cause pressure ulcers and things like that. Those tend to be the ones I see most often, but it could also be someone with a surgical wound that's not healing. It could be, a venous insufficiency or arterial insufficiency wound that's causing it. So those are the folks that we see, I think, most often.
yeah, I would agree. And on top of that, we have this fragile population. Most of them are homebound. Most of them are already seeing home health come in. They have the nurse, the therapist that's working with them. Maybe they've had hospitalization, maybe they haven't. But in any case, what I've noticed is nutrition, their mobility, like you mentioned, being able to offload and such, plays such a huge factor in this because we look at healing, right, beyond just, oh, did we put on a specific dressing? Really, it takes into account the totality of the health of the patient. You think of kids and like, why do they heal so fast? Well, most of them are really healthy and they have lots of regenerative cells that are able to allow them to do that. And we start moving into the senior population, right, where maybe they're not in the best health, maybe they have other comorbidities that could impact their healing, such as diabetes, for example, cardiovascular disease, all of these other things and factors that would delay their healing. And now let's say they have a skin tear or a pressure ulcer or something of that nature, where okay, it's open, and maybe a young healthy person could heal that up pretty quickly. Maybe it's a week, 2 weeks. Some of these folks, and you've seen this too, Bill, they have these wounds that last a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and just
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
All right. And and like you hit on something so important that it made me smile a little bit. And it's you encounter folks who say, I wish I had met you a year ago. And there's this element of hope now where there's this situation where they felt like maybe this is hopeless, this is never going to heal, to now there's actually a solution that has a high probability of helping them. So I know you've seen a number of patients or worked with a number of patients with your provider as well,
Hmm.
where you've been able to provide this hope. Can you share any of those details without getting into any like sensitive PHI?
Yeah, I mean, a great example was a lady, 75-year-old. I think maybe 80 plus years old, paraplegic, who had developed some sacral pressure wounds, and just because of the way she's positioned every day, could not get these wounds to heal with traditional treatment. Had kind of given up, and we came along. Her home health company introduced us to her. They referred us to her, and we were able to take her on as a patient. And when we started, her wounds were large, let's just say that, and very challenging for our NP Ashley to treat. But she did an incredible job of really kind of figuring out the approach for this wound, using the amniotic graft beautifully to reduce the tunneling of the wound, which was really causing the majority of the problem. And once that was kind of under control, then the overall wound also started to heal really wonderfully. Um, we were able to take this patient from a position where she said, quote, I had lost hope that I would ever get this wound healed and be able to do kind of regain some functionality that I used to have, and I know I could have, but I've got this wound. And so we were able to get her to the point now where we came so close to getting her 100% healed, and her home health care is going to get her there the rest of the way, and she'll be able to kind of get back into doing some physical therapy. Think she's going to drive again someday. We'll see. I'm not going to tell her she's not. So I mean, that's a pretty dramatic story for a wound that was probably close to 2 years old.
Wow.
And
And,
then
and in what time frame was this that you were treating,
but that's what I was
or
going to
Ashley
say.
was
We had
treating?
10 weeks
10
is what
weeks.
we were allowed to treat her. So ten treatments over the course of, I think, 11 weeks.
It's
Yeah,
amazing. What
pretty
was that
awesome.
like for you as the person who, like, worked with the provider, got this referral in, maybe you had that initial contact with the patient from where she was to where she is now?
Dude, it's everything. I mean, it is like exactly why you take the job, because when you take the job and you are told that we have this method and this ability to treat people and heal wounds that won't heal, who would not want to do that? Like seriously, who would not want to do that? And then to be able to go out and talk about it and then see it happen and see the effect that you have on another human being's life is like just the best.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me, and I love hearing about people's backgrounds and why they do what they do. And what you said specifically was that feeling that you got the result, that you were able to, that we were as a company and providers were able to help this patient through, was everything.
We also, in the best of situations, get to go along with the provider
Yeah.
for treatments. And it doesn't always happen, but along the way, and in this case that I just related, you do become friendly with the patient, and you eventually become kind of bonded and friends from that. And so now you're not just seeing a patient healed, you're seeing your friend get healed who you really genuinely
So
care
and
about.
so, right? It's, the
Yeah,
person that I truly care about beyond
right.
the patient
I mean,
relationship.
it's a real benefit to what I do.
Yeah, and I know a little bit about your background. It's super interesting. I know you were and still are a DJ. I know you've owned some businesses as well before this, but you know, take us back a little bit. Like, what is it that the outside person looking in kind of needs to know about Bill Gilliam?
Yeah, well, I have always had an affinity for older folks. I grew up in a family where I had predominantly great aunts and uncles that I hung around with because my mom was an only child. So, that's who I was always exposed to being really young. When I sold my entertainment company in 2015, I really just felt like I want to do something for seniors. I want to do something to serve seniors. I want to be around seniors. I want to give to seniors. And so I went into the assisted living world for a couple of years. COVID hit. That was pretty terrible in the assisted living world. I left thinking I was going to take kind of a next step in assisted living, not realizing how long COVID was going to last.
Right,
There really weren't any opportunities that I could find and I was interested in. Then I went to work once COVID kind of started to lift. I went to work for a really innovative senior living company that helped people figure out the next step for them in senior living. It might be how, I'm aging and I can't take care of my home. How can I do this? I want to live here until I
right.
die, or what are the next steps? I know eventually I'm going to, if I live long enough, I'll be appropriate for assisted living or whatever. And what does that look like? So we had a service where we came alongside folks and helped them with literally anything related to aging, period. There were no guardrails on that. Didn't have to limit our advice on anything that we did, and that was a really satisfying job
I would
until
imagine so.
rebirth advanced healing came along, and I was like, that sounds really amazing to be able to heal people who are struggling. I mean, how awesome is that? So that's the real quick look at the trajectory of how I went from running a large entertainment business to getting into senior living to ending up at Rebirth.
Yeah, I heard you mention amniotic grafting before, and obviously, we're kind of in the same situation here. You're in the Richmond market. I'm in the Northern Virginia market. But for those who are tuning in, and I get this question all the time because there's such a curiosity, there's such an interest about this amniotic grafting, and they see the results that we produce, but a lot of people don't know a lot about it. From your perspective, could you share a little bit more about like what that actually means and what these amniotic grafts are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, I'm not a clinician, so I'm not going to go deep.
No,
But
I
I
wouldn't
think
expect that either.
from
And
a
but
layman's
yeah,
a layman, I don't think a layman who's watching this or listening to this is going to want you to go deep and talk about biology too much. Really, what they want to know is what it is and what it does and what it's going to mean to them, right? So, what it is the placenta donated at a live, scheduled, healthy C section birth by the mother. The placenta is dehydrated, it is sterilized and processed in a way to make it available for what we call grafting, which may be a little bit of a misnomer because if you think about skin grafts, that's a surgical procedure and it's sewn on, that's sutured on and that kind of thing. Whereas this is not. But what happens is with the amniotic graft is when it is applied to the appropriate wound bed, which means there's some granular tissue there for it to react with, it is going to have a cellular reaction that is produced from the stem cells, the collagen, the cytokines, and the multiple growth factors that are in a human placenta. And it will, over the course of a certain number of treatments, begin to produce tissue, right? I mean, that's the way I see it? Is that the way you see
yeah.
it? Yeah.
I don't know that I could have said it any better. The way I think about it is, well, who's growing most rapidly? Where is the most
Mm,
cellular growth
yeah.
happening in terms of the totality of our lives? Well, it's when we're in the womb, when we're babies, right? So why is this placental tissue so have that capability of doing so? And so if we think about that, it just makes sense. and to be able to utilize those stem cells, the growth factors, the things that that make this process possible in the
Yeah.
first place. Like you said, we're able. This is sterilized in the lab. It's created into a format, and from what I've seen, it looks like a little Listerine strip. It's very thin. And what's exciting now is that there's been further and further development of these products, of these grafts that are coming out, going from a single layer to a dual layer to a tri layer and even a
Hmm.
quad layer now, where the specificity of the grafts is going to be able to be tailored to the specific type of wound. And so now, again, I mean, my background is as a PT, but I'm not an NP, I'm not a PA, I'm not that
Yeah.
level of clinician. But when our clinicians are looking at these wounds, they could say, oh, yes, diabetic foot ulcer, we're going to be able to use this graft versus, oh, we've got a burn wound, we're going to use this specific graft so that we can really tailor that treatment for the best possible effect and also in that shortest time frame. Because again, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and the our clinicians are not just out there laying graft. They're talking to these patients about their nutrition, about their mobility, about the other factors that are going to help in terms of maximizing their healing ability. So we want to do that as a whole, and it's what's allowed so many of our patients really to turn into success stories. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I go on as many treatments as I can with our NP Ashley, and she is always, always educating the patient in any number of ways. It could be about repositioning, it could be about nutrition, it could be about don't don't touch it, whatever.
Don't touch it.
Just don't touch it. And she's especially good at charting. And communicating with our partners in home health, because remember, we're only there one day a week, and so she's talking to the other nurses that treat this patient and talking to them about what she did that day, and kind of giving them some direction from her perspective as an NP on what they should do to care for this patient, based on the patient's wound. Sorry, not on the patient's total care, but on the wound.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that too. My provider, Matt, he's a PA up here in Northern Virginia, and his patients love him. The communities that we're in love him. Our home health partners love him, and it goes beyond his clinical expertise because the providers that we have truly are world class when it comes to wound care, which I think is something that does separate us, from some of the competition out there.
Yep. I agree.
But I've heard numerous positive things about his bedside manner and the education that takes place when out on those visits. And
But it's
truthfully, is
also, TJ, it's also like on that human side, that ability to relate to all kinds of different people. Just because you're a clinical person and you've got a degree as an NP or a PA or an MD does not mean that you understand how to communicate with other human beings and put them at ease, educate them, be loving towards them and caring towards them. I mean, those are really special qualities that go beyond having a degree, that are very human, and that I have to believe are part of the equation of healing. And that we have a team, but we also have and we have all this expertise, but we also have this human element as well.
yeah, you hit on something so important there too, because at the end of the day, it comes back to the quality of care for the patient. And to me, that goes beyond, hey, did we heal this wound or not, or did we lay the appropriate graft? To me, it comes down to the totality of the experience that the patient has had. And part of that is our collaboration with our home health partners. Part of that is our collaboration with their general practitioner
Yeah.
and anyone else involved in the care of this patient. Because when we say multidisciplinary, we truly mean that. It is a collaboration for the total benefit of this patient. And part of that equation is, how do we communicate with that patient? How does our provider, who's out their bedside, communicate with that patient, with the family, because all of these things matter. When in the past, I think we look at, you go to a doctor and bedside, oh, they didn't have bedside manner, and that was just accepted. But I don't think that's the case anymore because people have options.
Yeah, they're customers too, right? I mean, and everybody needs to remember that that they need to be given the amount of respect that is required because of that. Um, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, that's part of why I love what we do. And I haven't encountered a single person on our team, whether it be on the clinical side or on our side, the front lines, who just doesn't agree with that philosophy.
Right. And think about, while you're on the subject of communication, think about what your job and my job is, other than going out and making relationships with people who see patients in need and can refer them to us. Once they refer them to us and once they were approved for treatment, mine and your job becomes very different. We are the hub of communication for the whole treatment. And so I know that I spend a fair amount of time first making sure that we know a date that's going to be appropriate for the patient to be treated, kind of clearing that with home health so we're not treating on the same day, making sure that works for our provider and that everybody's on the same page so everything happens when it's supposed to happen. I mean, how frustrating would it be if you need this treatment, right? And you worked with a practice that's different than ours, and that's not a priority. And the provider's supposed to come on Wednesday and they come on Thursday, and that's when home health is there, so they can't treat. And then you miss a week. And so you might have to skip that patient's treatment for a week because it's really important to do it on the same day each week. So one little miscommunication can knock the wheels off the bus, and it's like we've got to be so on point with making sure. I mean, I don't know about you, but I document every single communication I have with client or with patient, family, provider, home health, and I make sure that I'm documenting everything so I can go back and be sure that I know on this date I texted this client and they approved that a treatment for this day, and then I went on to home health and onto the NP and so on and so forth to make sure that we're all together, so we're not going to drop the ball somewhere. Because if we're the source of hope for those folks and then we screw that up, then we have not done our job. We really have really missed the opportunity to be that hope for them. So it's super important that we
Yeah,
communicate.
we have to deliver
Yeah,
week in and week out, and part of that, as you said, is making sure all parties on board, so we become that communication hub.
right.
And our providers are really good at being part of that puzzle as well. But like you said, if the provider's off by a day and they show up on the same day as home health, well, it's a recipe for bad patient
for
care.
poor results, which
Yeah,
we don't want. We want the right results to get that good overall positive outcome for the patient, so we can advance that patient in the way that they need to be advanced. Whatever that means for them, keeping them out of the hospital, getting them back to PT, whatever it is that we're trying to do. Those are the goals, and if we don't communicate, we're not going to hit those goals.
yeah. One of my favorite things to do with the the home health companies, whoever the referral source is for that matter, is after we've started getting some results to be able to go back with pictures, even though they're getting these notes
Mhm.
already, to be able to go back with pictures of the wound from day one to, okay, maybe we're 2 weeks in now, measurements from the provider, and say, this is amazing. This is what we've done so far. And they love it. Long gone are the days where, home health marketers or whoever it is going out and just like dropping off donuts and leaving and hoping for referrals. Very much, at least I believe in the show up with a reason, value based communication, meaning that, hey, when I walk into a home health office, for example, and I want to connect with a director of nursing that maybe sent us a patient or the patient care coordinator, I've got pictures on my phone. I have all my ducks in a row saying this is what we've been able to help with so far, and they may already know it, but just to reinforce that. And when we deliver that with passion, with excitement, like I was talking with my wife the other day. She's like, you should have a tradition or a celebration, like a ring the bell sort of thing. Every time you heal a wound, and like you go in and you meet with your referral partner, and I don't know what it is yet, but I thought it was
I
a
like
brilliant
that.
idea because it's like, wow, another success, another success, another success.
All right, I have a couple ideas, but I'll save that for later. But
We'll have to talk about that offline
yeah,
because that'll be
offline, let's talk about that because I think that's a brilliant idea because I think it's meaningful. I think that's meaningful, and they're looking for they're looking toward us. The people who refer us are looking toward us as a resource to help their patient, and if we can do that, we have really helped them be successful. But they're also driven. I mean, there are nurses out there who love the challenge of a good wound, and they're determined to get it healed. But if they can't, what an awesome thing that we're able to come in and help them then still be successful at getting it healed. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I like that. That was
put
your
lots of
wife
fun
though.
there. Lots
She's the brilliant one, right?
she is the smart one.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
but
yeah.
we already knew that.
Right. That was assumed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're coming on time. I want to establish a tradition on this show. And I mentioned it to you before, so hopefully you had a little bit of time to think on it. But I want to take a moment to highlight maybe one of our community partners. Maybe it's a home health company. Maybe it's an administrator at a hospital. Maybe it's your nurse practitioner, whoever it is. Bill, who's somebody that over the past 2 weeks that you would love to shout out, to give some credit to, just to point out, to highlight in our senior care little bubble here so that we can share that with our audience as well?
It's hard because there are two that really come to mind. So I'm going to pick one, and if the other one's watching, I'll next time I'll give them a quick
We'll
second
save that for
place.
the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, or I'll give them a quick second place. But I have to say that for what we do, being able to communicate with, um, a, I guess what we would call a referral source, a home health company that can refer patients to us, being able to talk to them like a partner instead of some kind of vendor buyer adversarial relationship makes a huge difference. And last week and in the weeks leading up to this, I've been able to walk into HCA Healthcare at Home and speak to one of their clinical directors, Angela Dillon, and really have conversations about her census and what we can do to help her reduce the wounds on her census, knowing what that's going to do for their overall success for their patients. And to be able to have that kind of really just cooperative conversation where she's talking about what she needs and I'm talking about what we can do to satisfy that, and then to get those referrals and advance them on to approval and then to schedule the treatments is that's amazing. I mean, and so everybody wins.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you not like that?
I love it. No, I
So
appreciate that shout out, and hopefully she's listening. We'll
yeah,
have
well,
to send it on to her.
so the second place goes to Care Advantage, who included me in what they call their skills fair last week, and I got to meet a lot of their providers, and in that I got to talk to two providers who had patients with really challenging wounds, and one of those we ran them for approval. One got approved, and it was really the one who really needed it the most. So I was very relieved. And so this lady who has been suffering horribly, I think we're going to be able to give her some hope. So, thumbs up to them as well, because that was a great day for me to meet all their providers. And I don't know if would have made that connection. She didn't really know about us. So that was
That's what
great.
we're out there to do, make
Yeah.
everyone aware of us.
Yeah. So very satisfying.
Bill, thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh,
It's a
man. Thank
fantastic
you.
conversation. Look forward to the next one. This might be the first of many.
Next time I'll interview you, TJ.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'm not a
Okay.
talker.
Well,
Bill,
yes,
we'll
you
see you
are.
on
You
the
did
next one.
great. Thank you.
All right.